Hi, it's Bighara here with another installment of my video blog. Had a couple things to talk about this morning. One, I had a comment from a viewer, Badazer, and yes, I am deliberately mispronouncing the username, who had asked me about the episode I did about the Keep on the Borderlands and about the campaign we had started and how things were going with that. I had been meaning to revisit that, but I hadn't gotten around to it. The short answer is we're not currently playing Keep. But that's not so bad because we had been doing a lot of play testing on a product that had taken a long time, but now is finally out. Those of you that subscribe may have seen a video that got posted yesterday, actually, with a little preview of it. That's for Faster Monkeys, Lesserton, and more. And we've now released it, obviously, so playtesting is over, obviously that too. We were having a lot of fun with that game, so we didn't want to just abandon it, but at this point, a couple of the people in our group are talking about buying a copy. Yay! And if people start buying it and reading it, then we may not be playing it anymore because there may be spoilers. But we'll see. The quick recap of the Keep on the Borderlands campaign would have been, so far, was we had two-player character deaths, both by traps. I had modified the layer slightly so it wouldn't be a complete walkthrough for people who knew the module. They pretty much cleaned out the Hobgoblin layer. They discovered a little bit of a mystery going on at the Keep regarding a merchant, which is something I threw in. It's not part of the module as written. And at that point, we're debating about what their next move would be because they were dealing with the information they had discovered about the merchant. Or the questions that were raised about the merchant. So that's Keep on the Borderland. They had reached second level. One of the PCs actually died from a trap after reaching second level. But so you have at this point, I think it's 2 second level and 1 first level PC. I believe that's right. Second thing I was going to talk about was a game that I had recently discovered. I've been doing a blog, a more typical print and still image blog called 48 Orcs in 28 Days, where I'm trying to speed paint my way through a bunch of Games Workshop works. And it's just sort of a way to keep me on task and keep me working on it and motivated. But one of the comments over there, if I fell by the name of Desert Scribe, and if you're into sci-fi gaming with minis or anything like that, you should check out his blog, and I'll post a link, down there. And he mentioned a skirmish game called Song of Blade and Heroes, which is done by Ganesha Games, and it is a lot of fun. You can get a PDF download of the basic rules for $5. And unlike a game like Warhammer or something like that, you're not using the company's minis. You're just whatever minis you got, you put them down and you can stat them up and off you go. They have it for different genres and things. And I've managed to play a couple of test games. I played one with my daughter last night. And I don't think I've got the rules down 100%, but it's a fun game. It's particularly fun because there's usually a trade-off in your decisions, which I always like. I always like it when there's not something that's always a good idea or always a bad idea. And it moves pretty fast, and it also has a lot of options, so you can play it leaner or with more options, and it's very modular that way. You just kind of stick in what you want or what you don't want. And the other nice thing is that the game can swing either way. You think everything's going, this team's way, and then one roll here, one roll there, and next thing you know, it's kind of the pendulum swinging back the other way. So it keeps you guessing. It's unpredictable, but not in a nonsensical way, but in a very dynamic kind of way. So, not exactly a full review, but if you like skirmish games, these I think it's geared mostly towards doing something along the lines of a dozen models or less per warband. You should check it out. There's a Yahoo group if you're interested in asking questions and stuff like that, and there's a ton of supplements. I'll post a link to both Ganesha Games, the Yahoo group, and my orc blog if anybody cares. Which brings me to the last thing I was going to talk about today, which is getting back more to the normal theme of this video blog, which is old school gaming, and that's dragons. Yes, actual the monsters, not Dungeons but the actual dragons. Was reading a little bit of discussion about some Arthurian legends and myths and so forth, which got me looking at things like, Beowulf, both the animated movie, which I don't care what anyone says, I like, and the actual original saga, things like that, translated into English, but yeah, the original saga, and the various perceptions of dragons that have sort of evolved over the years, and then how that's kind of translated to gaming. And one of the things I've noticed is a definite scaling up of dragons, at least up through, in gaming, up through in Dungeons and Dragons, through 3.5 at least. I'm not sure how different they are in 4th edition or in Pathfinder, but I would guess they're kept pretty significant, or if not even more powerful, or potentially more powerful. When you look at the original classic D&D, like basic D&D and things like that, most dragons capped out at around 9 or 10 hit dice. And this is a D8 hit die. It's not like in 3rd edition where some things had a D12 hit die and so forth and so on. And you think about that, well, that's, 9 times 8 is 72, 72 hit points, and, coming in at around AC 0 or 1 or 2, that's I wouldn't want to meet it, but it's not necessarily this huge invincible monster. And it's a good fight, and the lethality of the dragon is not to be underestimated, but it's not something that's going to terrorize a whole kingdom. And so you had this thing where a dragon was definitely something you would very likely meet at some point. There were some even on the wandering monster tables. But it wasn't something necessarily that was going to be the entire fight or the entire adventure. I wrote a module recently where there was a dragon in it. I don't want to give away a lot of spoilers, but it certainly wasn't the only challenge. It was just sort of the final challenge, and yes, there was a dragon horde and the treasure, and in the treasure tables in classic D&D and Labyrinth Lord and things like that, those are very generous, but at the same time, they're not millions and millions of gold pieces. There are creatures in classic D&D that are much more dangerous than a dragon. The dragon turtle is the one that comes to mind off the top of my head. In basic expert D&D and in Labyrinth Lord and those games, the dragon turtle is 30 hit dice and an AC of -2. It is far scarier than any standard dragon. In any case, that said, one of the neat things about classic dragons, I'll also point out, is the fact that when they use their breath weapon, they do their current hit points and damage. So that 72 hit point red dragon does 72 hit points of fire damage, unless you make your saving throw, as opposed to a random die roll, which was sort of an interesting mechanic, I thought. As you wounded the dragon and as it got weaker, its breath weapon got weaker. And of course it could only breathe a limited number of times a day. As opposed to games like in 1st edition and in 3rd edition, I never really played much 2nd edition, the dragons got more and more powerful. And I think part of that was in reply to players getting more powerful, because you wanted the dragon to be this significant encounter. I don't really have a problem with it either way. If anything, like on occasion, I will tend to want to make the dragons, even in the older school games like Labyrinth Lord and Basic Expert D&D, to be a little more powerful than by the book. Maybe give them a couple extra hit dice, maybe drop their armor class by 1, something like that. But the other thing I was going to touch on briefly about dragons are dragon tactics. Dragons are supposed to be smart. Dragons are so often can use magic. This is going by the classic rules. They are not dumb beasts. They live virtually forever, so they have time to get their lair set up the way they want. The main thing I think that can make a dragon encounter really challenging, even when you're using the less ramped up stats of a system like Basic Expert D&D or Rule Cyclopedia or or Labyrinth Lord, though there are more powerful dragons in Rule Cyclopedia, is to take into account tactics. First of all, the thing's going to fly if it can. It's not going to just sit there on the ground and let people bash it with a sword. It's breath weapon. It's, swooping around. It's maybe it set up defenses within its lair. Things like that. I don't know if it's got traps, but there may be spells in place or things like that, alarms, that sort of thing. And also, depending on how you want to play them, they may have an escape route. Sometimes a dragon, some people play it, they're so greedy they die defending their horde, and then other times they're like, it'll live to fight another day. And I think that's something you don't have to be all or one way or the other about. You might say that this dragon is particularly greedy, but that dragon isn't, or this dragon is cowardly. They can have personalities. That's another thing I like to see. I love it to see it when a player will try to engage a dragon in like conversation or parlay or something. I was just recently rereading The Hobbit, and of course, Bilbo talking to Smaug comes to mind. Things like the riddling and the flattery and and so forth and so on. I think dragons would be interesting to use as possibly recruited as allies. I think that would be an interesting thing in a game that you don't see that much of. I think part of that is also because of just the raw amount of treasure and experience that a dragon is worth to the party. It's kind of hard for the players to let that go. I mean, they're thinking about tens of thousands of gold pieces plus a bunch of magic items or whatever it is, and they're like, well, we could talk to him and maybe just strike a deal with him, but we can take it. And then they just fight. But it's a fun fight usually. And speaking as someone going back, touching briefly on the whole skirmish thing, as a GM that uses miniatures and terrain and stuff like that, there's just nothing compares to taking that dragon mini and just plunking it down on the table and looking at the players, and they're just like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, I'm serious. It's go time. So anyway, the other thing I was going to touch on is how common they might be. I like dragons to be fairly rare. I don't like the idea of there being like a council of dragons, or there's a dragon advisor to the king, or they're just flying all over the place, because I don't usually run them as just unintelligent, bestial, savage monsters. I usually try to run them as fairly intelligent, but I also try to run them as alien. I don't like it when they're just have a human mentality, because they shouldn't. They're by human standards, they're very, very alien. Their whole mindset and everything, and their reactions should be very unusual compared to a human's. Robert Plamondon in his book Through Dungeons Deep discusses that briefly, and I think he does a good job of that. That's a great book, by the way, if you can find a copy. I think it's back in print now. And again, I'll try to post a link. So, in conclusion, because I've been rambling on about this for a little bit, and like I say, I want to talk about a couple other things too. Try to keep this video from getting too long. I mean, use dragons how you want, but it's a shame, in my mind, from an old school fantasy perspective, to just have them be a casual encounter or a random encounter or something that happens with any kind of real frequency in a campaign, unless it's something where the campaign specifically has a lot to do with dragons. I think there are a lot of monsters, things like wyverns and stuff like that, that you can use that can provide a lot of the same kind of fight, but aren't real dragons. I think if a party slays a dragon, that should be worth a serious amount of prestige and things like that. I don't usually play a world where it's like there's only one dragon in the whole world, but like I say, I don't like them on every street corner and hiding behind every hill. But, run it the way you like, and the point is to have fun. So, that's all for now. Take it easy.